Every morning, millions of people make choices they believe will bring them closer to a healthier life. Among a slice of bread, a piece of fruit, and a cup of coffee, there's a food that, for decades, was avoided out of fear. Some removed it completely from their diet. Others spent years consuming only the egg white, discarding the yolk as if it hid an invisible danger. The decision seemed logical. After all, doctors recommended caution, newspapers printed alarming headlines, and experts warned of an enemy called cholesterol. But there's an intriguing detail in this story. Today, that same food appears among the recommendations of nutritionists, sports doctors, and nutrition researchers. It's a constant presence in diets aimed at weight control, muscle gain, healthy aging, and even the prevention of malnutrition in the elderly. What was once treated with suspicion has become considered one of the most complete foods in existence. How did this happen? Did millions of people receive misguided advice for decades? Or did science simply discover something that wasn't previously visible? This question goes far beyond the egg. It reveals how it is born. This article explores how a scientific hypothesis can gain traction, influence governments, transform consumption habits across the globe, and, years later, be reevaluated in light of more robust evidence. It also shows why simplified headlines can create certainties where doubts still exist, and how our understanding of food is constantly evolving. Throughout this investigation, we will go back in time to understand why such an ancient food has become one of the biggest villains of modern nutrition. We will discover what the first studies actually showed, which interpretations went beyond the available evidence, and how more recent research has profoundly changed the way we view cholesterol and cardiovascular health. In the end, perhaps the greatest discovery is not about the egg itself, but about science itself, because it doesn't advance when it insists on being right, but precisely when it accepts questioning its own certainties. And few stories illustrate this, as well as the trajectory of a food that went from the forbidden list to once again occupying a prominent place in the diets of millions of people. To understand why the egg carried the reputation of being a dangerous food for so long, it is necessary to go back to a period when the world was facing a true silent crisis. In the 1950s and 1960s, cardiovascular diseases began to become a leading cause of death in several countries. Heart attacks and strokes were appearing earlier and earlier, affecting seemingly healthy people. Medicine was still trying to understand what was happening. At that time, a clue seemed to be gaining strength. Researchers observed that individuals with high blood cholesterol levels had a greater risk of developing fatty plaques in their arteries. The relationship made sense. If there was cholesterol accumulated in the arteries, it seemed reasonable to imagine that consuming foods rich in cholesterol would lead to the same accumulation within the body. It was a logical hypothesis, but logic doesn't always mean truth. At that time, the science of nutrition was still in its infancy. Research methods were much more limited than they are today. Most conclusions came from observational studies, which can identify associations but not prove cause and effect. Even so, the hypothesis gained enormous repercussion. One of the most influential names of that period was the American physiologist Ansel Keys, known for investigating the relationship between diet and cardiovascular disease. His work helped to the idea that diets high in saturated fats could raise blood cholesterol and increase cardiovascular risk was consolidated. Although his research contributed enormously to the advancement of preventive cardiology, it also ended up being interpreted in a much simpler way than reality allowed. In practice, a message began to dominate newspapers, television programs, and public health campaigns. If a food contains cholesterol, it increases blood cholesterol. It was an intuitive conclusion, and precisely for that reason, extremely convincing. The egg became one of the main targets. A single yolk contains a significant amount of dietary cholesterol. At a time when almost no one differentiated between cholesterol present in food and cholesterol produced by the body itself, this fact was enough to transform it into a symbol of risk. Official recommendations began to emerge. In several countries, the population was advised to drastically limit egg consumption. Some guidelines suggested not exceeding 3 eggs per week. Many people spent decades following this advice to the letter. The food industry quickly noticed the change in behavior. Products advertised as cholesterol-free began to occupy shelf space. Supermarkets. Margarine replaced butter. Processed foods highlighted the absence of cholesterol on their labels as synonymous with health, even when they contained large amounts of refined sugar, highly processed starches, and refined vegetable oils. Marketing found a perfect enemy. When there is only one villain, everything seems simpler. Meanwhile, the consumption of ultra-processed products grew rapidly in various parts of the world. Curiously, many of these products were considered healthy choices simply because they contained less fat or no cholesterol. Few questioned the rest of the composition. This period also marked the birth of the so-called low-fat culture. Restaurants, diet books, advertisements, and even health professionals began to automatically associate fat with disease. The egg yolk became practically a symbol of this collective fear. Many people got used to ordering omelets with only egg whites. Others simply stopped consuming eggs for years. Entire families changed their eating habits, believing they were protecting their hearts. And for a long time, almost no one doubted this strategy. After all, it seemed to be backed by the best science available at that time. But there was an important problem. While attention was focused on cholesterol in food, the actual workings of human metabolism were far more sophisticated than previously imagined. The body is not simply a receptacle that accumulates what we ingest. It continuously regulates, produces, recycles, and controls cholesterol in extremely complex ways. This fundamental piece of the story was still hidden, and it would be precisely this that would begin to dismantle one of the greatest certainties of modern nutrition. While eggs were pointed to as one of the main culprits in cardiovascular diseases, one question remained practically unanswered. Where does the cholesterol circulating in our blood come from? For a long time, the answer seemed obvious: from food. But as science advanced, researchers discovered something surprising. Most of the cholesterol in the body does not come from food. It is produced by the body itself. The liver functions as a veritable cholesterol factory. Every day, it produces this substance because it is indispensable for life. Cholesterol participates in the formation of the membranes of all cells, serves as raw material for important hormones such as testosterone, estrogen, and cortisol, and is essential for the production of vitamin D and bile acids, which aid in the digestion of fats, are essential. In other words, without cholesterol, the human body simply wouldn't function. This completely changes the way we view the problem. If the body naturally produces cholesterol, what happens when we ingest foods that also contain it? That's when researchers began to observe a fascinating mechanism. In many people, when cholesterol intake increases, the liver responds by reducing its own production. When the diet provides less cholesterol, it does the opposite. It increases its production. It's like a compensation system. The body constantly works to maintain a balance. This discovery showed that the relationship between dietary cholesterol and blood cholesterol was much less direct than previously thought. But this doesn't mean that egg consumption is irrelevant for everyone. Science has also revealed that not everyone responds in the same way. There is a segment of the population known as hyperresponsive, in which blood cholesterol may increase more after ingesting foods rich in cholesterol. Even in these cases, the increase usually occurs in both LDL and HDL cholesterol, and the impact on cardiovascular risk depends on several other factors, such as genetics, dietary patterns, physical activity, and conditions. Metabolic factors. In other words, a single food rarely tells the whole story. While this understanding was beginning to emerge in laboratories, another important detail remained practically invisible. The first studies linking cholesterol and cardiovascular disease coexisted with numerous factors capable of distorting the results. At that time, smoking was extremely common. Sedentary lifestyles were increasing in large cities. The consumption of ultra-processed foods was rapidly increasing. Refined sugar became part of the routine of millions of people. Obesity was still poorly understood. Hypertension was frequently untreated. Many people who consumed more eggs also had other habits that increased cardiovascular risk, such as smoking, excessive consumption of processed meats, or a diet poor in fruits, vegetables, and fiber. Separating these factors was not simple. With the statistical tools available decades ago, many of these influences ended up mixing. It was like trying to discover which piece of a huge domino had started the entire sequence of falls. As scientific methods evolved, researchers began to better control these variables, and the scenario began to change. Another aspect little noticed by the public was the difference between association and causality. Imagine that people carrying umbrellas frequently appear on days with wet streets. This doesn't mean the umbrellas caused the rain. Similarly, finding two conditions occurring together doesn't prove that one caused the other. This is one of the biggest challenges in nutrition research. People don't consume foods in isolation. Those who eat eggs also consume bread, fruits, meats, vegetables, drinks, and countless other foods. Furthermore, they sleep more or less, exercise or don't exercise, smoke or not, face different levels of stress, and have their own genetic characteristics. Each of these factors influences health. This is precisely why the science of nutrition evolves gradually. New evidence doesn't completely replace old evidence. It helps to build a more accurate picture of reality. Meanwhile, outside the scientific environment, communication followed a different path. The media needed short messages. Yolk is bad. Avoid cholesterol. Eat only the white. These phrases were easy to understand, but they simplified an extremely complex subject. For years, the egg carried a reputation built more on the interpretation of evidence. Available sources of information were more focused on a complete understanding of human physiology. And then something happened that changed this story. Researchers began to gather dozens of studies, following hundreds of thousands of people for long periods. Instead of analyzing isolated studies, they began to observe the body of evidence as a whole. And it was at this moment that an old certainty began, slowly, to lose strength. The question ceased to be, how many eggs does a person eat? And it became much more interesting. What is this person's complete dietary pattern, and how does it influence their health over the years? This shift in perspective would mark the beginning of one of the greatest revisions in the history of nutritional science. For many years, the recommendation seemed unquestionable. Limiting egg consumption was a simple way to protect the heart. But science has a characteristic that differentiates it from any belief-based system. It accepts being challenged. As the years passed, researchers accumulated a quantity of data that simply did not exist in previous decades. New studies followed hundreds of thousands of people for many years. In addition, more sophisticated statistical techniques allowed for a better separation of the effect of a food from the countless factors that influence health. It was in this scenario that unexpected results began to emerge. Several systematic reviews and meta-analyses, studies that gather and analyze the best available research, began to show that, for most healthy people, moderate egg consumption was not associated with a significant increase in the risk of cardiovascular disease. This conclusion attracted attention because it contradicted decades of recommendations. But it did not mean that the older studies were completely wrong. This meant the picture was much more complex than previously thought. Researchers realized that blood cholesterol is influenced by a combination of factors: genetics, physical activity, overall diet quality, body weight, smoking, diabetes, inflammation, and even sleep quality. The egg was just a small piece of this enormous puzzle. Another important discovery concerned LDL cholesterol itself, often called bad cholesterol. Today we know that this classification is a simplification. There are LDL particles with different sizes and characteristics. In some situations, smaller, denser particles seem to be more associated with the development of atherosclerosis than larger particles. Furthermore, higher levels of HDL, often called good cholesterol, are also part of the cardiovascular risk assessment. This doesn't mean LDL is no longer important. People with high LDL levels, especially due to genetic causes, continue to have a higher cardiovascular risk and should be monitored by a doctor. The point is different. Risk cannot be explained by a single food. It depends on the functioning of the body as a whole. At the same time, researchers began to study the role of chronic inflammation. For decades, it was thought that cholesterol alone was the main culprit in the formation of plaques in the arteries. Today, it is understood that this process involves a much more complex interaction between cholesterol, inflammation, blood pressure, blood glucose, insulin resistance, smoking, and other metabolic factors. This new perspective has completely changed the focus of prevention. Instead of demonizing isolated foods, there has been a shift in the emphasis towards complete dietary patterns. Diets rich in vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, fish, and quality protein sources have demonstrated consistent benefits for cardiovascular health. Within this context, eggs have ceased to be seen as a problem for most people. Nutritional guidelines themselves have begun to reflect this change. In several countries, recommendations have stopped setting specific limits for dietary cholesterol for the general population. This is because the available evidence no longer supports the idea that cholesterol in food by itself is a significant determinant of blood cholesterol for most people. But it is important to make a distinction. The change in consensus does not mean that any quantity of eggs is automatically beneficial. No food acts as a kind of shield against disease. Context remains crucial. A person who consumes eggs as part of a diet rich in vegetables, fiber, quality protein, and minimally processed foods lives a very different reality from someone whose diet is based on ultra-processed products, sugary drinks, and excess calories. Eggs do not negate bad habits, just as it doesn't deserve to be held responsible for them. Another issue that required caution was the case of people with type 2 diabetes. Some observational studies suggested a possible association between high egg consumption and a higher cardiovascular risk in this group. However, subsequent research produced inconsistent results, and clinical trials did not clearly confirm that moderate egg consumption is harmful when included in a balanced diet. This is an excellent example of how science works. Not every question receives a definitive answer immediately. Sometimes, the evidence points in different directions, requiring further research before a solid consensus can be reached. Far from representing a weakness, this willingness to revise hypotheses is precisely what makes science reliable. It doesn't promise eternal certainties. It offers the best answers available at each moment, always open to improving them when more robust evidence emerges. That's exactly what happened with the egg. After decades playing the villain, it was once again analyzed for its overall nutritional characteristics, and not just for the cholesterol present in the yolk. And that's when many researchers started asking a different question. If the egg wasn't the problem we imagined, could it actually be one of the most nutritious foods on the table? When the focus shifted from isolated cholesterol to the food as a whole, the egg began to reveal a characteristic that had been ignored for decades. It's not just a source of fat or protein, it's a complete nutritional system. Within a relatively simple structure, there's a highly efficient combination of nutrients essential for the human body. The egg white is mainly composed of high biological value proteins. This means it contains all the essential amino acids that the body cannot produce on its own. These amino acids are fundamental for the construction and repair of tissues, including muscles, enzymes, and hormones. The yolk, previously seen as the problem, is precisely where the food has the highest nutritional density. It concentrates nutrients such as choline, fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, B vitamins, and important minerals like iron and selenium. Choline, in particular, has gained prominence in modern research for its role in brain function, memory, and the formation of neurotransmitters. For a long time, this set of nutrients was overshadowed by a single concern: cholesterol. But as science advanced, a new question began to guide food analysis. Instead of how much cholesterol does it have, the question became, what is the impact of this food within a complete dietary pattern? And this is where the egg begins to consistently stand out. Being highly nutritious and relatively accessible, it has become a strategic food in different contexts. In diets aimed at weight control, the egg has an important effect: satiety. Studies show that protein-rich foods tend to increase the feeling of satiety for longer. This happens because proteins influence hormones related to hunger and satisfaction, such as ghrelin and peptide YY. In practice, this can help reduce calorie intake throughout the day, without the need for extreme restrictions. In other words, the egg doesn't make you lose weight, but it can help the body better regulate appetite. In elderly populations, it has also gained relevance. With aging, there is a natural tendency towards muscle mass loss, known as sarcopenia. Adequate intake of high-quality protein becomes essential to preserve strength, mobility, and functional independence. Eggs, due to their ease of preparation and digestibility, fit well into this scenario. Another important point is their versatility. Eggs can be prepared in various ways, adapting to different food cultures, income levels, and social contexts. This characteristic makes them a food present in practically all regions of the world, from traditional diets to more modern dietary patterns. But perhaps the most significant change is not in the food itself, but in how it has come to be understood. For decades, the mistake was not just looking at the egg, but looking at it in isolation. Modern nutritional science increasingly reinforces that no single food defines a person's health. What matters is the whole: frequency, variety, overall diet quality, and lifestyle. In this context, eggs have ceased to be seen as a hidden risk and have come to be understood as part of a balanced dietary pattern. However, this rehabilitation does not mean a total absence of nuances. There are individuals with specific conditions, such as familial dyslipidemias or personalized medical guidelines, for whom dietary adjustments are necessary. Science does not eliminate biological individuality. It only helps to better understand general patterns. And it is precisely this transition from simplified fear to more complex understanding that marks one of the greatest evolutions in the recent history of nutrition. The egg hasn't changed. What has changed is the way we look at it. And this opens up space for even deeper reflection. If a scientific interpretation can change so much over time, what does this teach us about how we view other foods today? When someone looks back and sees that the egg was once considered dangerous and is now widely accepted, the most common reaction is to think of it as a mistake. But this reading is superficial. What really happened was not a change of truth, as if science had abandoned an old lie to adopt a new truth. What occurred was a progressive expansion of understanding. The science of nutrition, especially, does not function like a switch that changes from right to wrong. It functions more like a lens that gains resolution over time. Initially, the image was blurry. The first studies on cholesterol and cardiovascular disease were fundamental. They weren't wrong in observing associations between high blood cholesterol levels and a higher risk of cardiac events. this relationship truly exists. The problem arose from the simplified interpretation of this relationship. For a long time, it was assumed that reducing dietary cholesterol would be a direct and sufficient way to control blood cholesterol, and, consequently, cardiovascular risk. Today, we know that this chain is much more complex. The human body regulates cholesterol dynamically. There is internal production, compensatory mechanisms, genetic variations, and influences from multiple environmental and behavioral factors. Science didn't backtrack because it was wrong. It backtracked because it began to see more details. Another essential point is understanding how scientific knowledge is constructed. No single study is sufficient to establish a definitive truth. What matters is the body of evidence. That's why systematic reviews and meta-analyses carry so much weight. They bring together dozens or hundreds of studies to identify consistent patterns. And even then, these patterns can evolve. This happens because science doesn't work with absolute certainties, but with probabilities based on the best available evidence. As new technologies emerge, such as more precise methods of genetic analysis, advanced laboratory tests, and more robust statistical tools, the ability to understand complex phenomena also increases. What seemed like a direct relationship in the past may prove to be multifactorial in the present. And this is not a flaw in the system. It's exactly the opposite. It's a sign that the system is working. In the case of the egg, this evolution showed something important. The error was not only in the answers, but in the initial questions. For a long time, the question was, does this food contain cholesterol? Then it became, how much does this food increase blood cholesterol? And more recently, it has evolved into something much more comprehensive. How does this food fit into a person's dietary pattern and lifestyle over time? This change in perspective is the real breakthrough. It shifts the focus away from isolated villains and places attention on the system as a whole. Nutrition is not a sum of independent items. It is a network of interactions. The same food can have different impacts depending on the context in which it is consumed. An egg at breakfast for an active person with a diet rich in vegetables and low in ultra-processed foods does not represent the same reality as a dietary pattern based on refined products, excess sugar, and a sedentary lifestyle. The difference is not in the egg, it's in the whole picture. And this understanding helps to avoid one of the biggest problems in health communication: oversimplification. Phrases like, "this is bad," or "that is good," may be useful for quick messages, but they don't represent the complexity of human biology. The body doesn't respond to isolated foods as if they were simple commands. It responds to patterns, and understanding this completely changes how we deal with food on a daily basis. Instead of seeking rigid rules based on a single ingredient, modern science points to something more realistic: consistency, variety, quality, and context. In this scenario, the egg ceases to be the protagonist of a story of fear or exaltation. It becomes simply an example of how human knowledge evolves, and perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. What seems like absolute certainty today may, in the future, be refined, adjusted, or reinterpreted. Not because science fails, but because it continues to look more closely. The story of the egg is not, fundamentally, a story about a single food. It's a story about how human knowledge is built, transformed, and sometimes corrected over time. For decades, it was viewed with suspicion. In many homes, it became a symbol of caution, almost a controlled food, consumed with fear and restrictions. Then, with the advancement of research, it was reinterpreted in a new light, not as a hidden villain, but as part of a much broader and more complex food system. What this trajectory reveals is simple yet profound. Foods do not carry fixed destinies. They carry contexts, and context changes. Nutritional science has learned throughout this process that reducing complex problems to a single ingredient almost always leads to incomplete interpretations. The human body does not function by isolated rules. It responds to patterns, habits, and interactions that accumulate over the years. In the case of eggs, this became evident. The focus shifted from just the cholesterol present in the yolk to include the overall nutrient content, the surrounding dietary pattern, lifestyle, and accumulated evidence from large populations. And the result of this change wasn't the replacement of an old truth with a new one. It was a refinement, a clearer picture of the same phenomenon. Practical lessons from this investigation. The first lesson is that no single food defines health or disease. What matters is the dietary pattern as a whole. The second is that food quality goes far beyond a single nutrient. Proteins, fiber, vitamins, minerals, and the level of food processing are fundamental parts of the equation. The third is that context matters. The same food can have different effects depending on the rest of the diet, the level of physical activity, and the metabolic profile of each person. The fourth is that nutritional recommendations can evolve. This doesn't mean confusion, but scientific progress based on new evidence. And the fifth is that simplified interpretations of nutrition may be useful in the short term, but rarely reflect the full complexity of the human body. Today, the egg symbolizes exactly that. The transition from a view based on fear and simplification to a broader and more integrated understanding of nutrition. It's not a miracle superfood, nor is it a dangerous food. It's just food, but food that helps illustrate how science evolves when new data emerges and when better questions are asked. And perhaps that's the most important reflection, because by understanding the history of a single food, we begin to understand something even bigger, the need to look at food with fewer absolute certainties and more scientific curiosity. If this type of investigation has helped you see nutrition in a different way, it's worth paying closer attention to the stories we'll explore later. Because almost always, behind an everyday food, there's a much bigger story than it seems. Thank you for following along. If this content resonated with you, leave a comment, share your experience with this food, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next documentaries. And in the next video, we'll investigate another major protagonist of modern food, a food that has also been praised, demonized, and rediscovered by science over time.